culture. Such refined enlightenment reserved for the world's most celebrated museums, grand symphony halls, and city subways? Definitely. Some people define culture as it relates to the fine arts. But to sociologists, everything made or thought of by human beings is an expression of culture, and is therefore key to the understanding of human existence. It's been said that culture is the lens through which we perceive and evaluate what's going on around us. Each of us comes into this world with a clean slate, no preconceived notions, assumptions, or prejudices. But even before we attempt a first step, or utter that first intelligible word, our basic beliefs about life have already started to take root. We are learning to look at our world through the lens of our culture. Culture defines the very way we live, the values, beliefs, actions, speech, and artifacts passed down from one generation to another. A useful way of thinking about it was suggested by sociologist Robert Bierstedt. Some contemporary sociologists have adopted Bierstedt's three major dimensions of culture.
Three major dimensions of culture are ideas, norms, and material culture. You need an understanding of all three of them to get a grasp on what we mean by culture in general. Ideas are the things people think about, all of the thoughts that they have. These are our ideas. Norms are ideas about how society should conduct its business and how individuals in society should behave. Norms always have that should idea in them. Material culture are the things that we produce. Not only physical things, but also objects that are like music, art.
In America, we pride ourselves on being a nation of diversity. Not a week goes by without a festival, parade, or street fair somewhere across the country, celebrating ethnic or culturally distinct groups. In a country so rich with diverse cultural influences, can there be a truly American culture? Sociologists use the dimensions of culture, ideas, norms, and material culture to explore this possibility. First, what ideas can be found in American culture?
Ideas are our patterns of thought, the things that we think about our world. And in our American culture, we have ideas about freedom, about morality, about equality. These are all very much a part of our American way of life.
An idea cherished by Americans is that we're a democracy. And in a democracy, people have the right to express themselves. Freedom of speech is definitely an idea.
Perhaps the strongest idea within American culture is individualism, and that this is a culture in which the success of the individual is often more valued than the success of the group, and the traits of the individual are quite important.
Norms are the second dimension of culture. What norms do we find in American culture?
Our everyday norms can be as simple as who opens the door, who gets to ride in the front seat with mother, who is responsible for feeding the pets, who's responsible for clearing the table, who's responsible for putting clothes in the washer or the dryer, all of the rules of everyday life.
In American culture, norms are, an example would be, for instance, when you come into an elevator, you're not supposed to stare at people. Norms of interpersonal distance that have to be preserved.
And an example of norms in American culture would be like to be on time is important, promptness is important.
An example of norms in a family setting would be the rules about where people sit at a dinner table, If you go to your grandparents' house for Sunday dinner after church, then there are somewhat different norms. Everyone has their place.
The third dimension of culture is material culture. What examples of material culture do we find in America?
Material culture consists of all things created by human beings that you can touch, that are tangible, like the chair that I'm sitting in or the television that you're watching.
Material culture is everywhere. The clothes that I'm wearing are aspects of material culture. The cars we drive, the houses we live in, the songs we listen to, the movies we go to see, these are all examples of material culture.
Material culture is in constant flux, changing as society changes.
When I teach about material culture, I always take into my classroom Indian arrowheads that have been found where I live, and I show them to my students, and I show them as an example of a culture that doesn't exist as it once did. And then we laugh as we sit in these plastic and metal contraptions that are our desk. I ask them what's going to happen with this piece of our material culture.
In addition to ideas, norms, and material culture, sociologists examine technologies and ideologies when exploring a culture. A technology is a blend of the cultural dimensions of norms and material culture. The cell phone is an important technology in American culture.
The cell phone in the United States is an example of a technology which appeals to us because of our tremendous mobility. It enables us to feel more secure in our cars when we may have trouble, or if we're in a traffic jam and need to inform others.
Cell phones seem to reduce the kinds of public spaces that we have. People are more individually engaged in personal conversations walking down the street. When people are waiting together, they don't chat or talk. They talk on their cell phones or use their computers.
Ideologies are an aspect of culture that are formed by the combination of ideas and norms. Ideologies are ideas or sets of ideas about how people should behave. There are often ideological debates within American culture. One such debate is over the idea of public school.
The idea of the public school grows out of an ideology in the late 19th century which said that in order to produce effective citizens in a democracy, all children should go to school. They should have access to good public schools. Now there are people in American life who have counter-ideologies. They say the public school is a place where the ideas that are being taught to our children are ideas we don't like. And so we should be able to teach our children at home. This is an example of two conflicting ideologies, the ideology of the public school and its upholders versus the ideology of schooling at home, the homeschool movement.
American culture is tremendously complex. In order to truly understand these complexities, the dimensions of culture are very important tools.
All five of the elements of culture, ideas, norms, material culture, ideologies, and technologies, are all interwoven within what we know as culture and are all essential and are all constantly changing in a big culture like ours.
Anthropologist Ralph Linton once wrote, "The last thing a fish would ever notice would be water." Even this male beta, a breed known for being particularly aware of its environment and even curious about the world outside, probably doesn't realize his dependence on his aquatic surroundings, unless he accidentally jumps out of the bowl. As humans, we tend to ignore our dependence on our cultural environment. The aspects of our culture, our attitudes, beliefs, language, and behaviors, are taken for granted. So when we jump outside of our own culture, we are quite literally like a fish out of water. We experience culture shock.
Culture shock is the personal disorientation that happens when you enter an unfamiliar social world. So when you're not familiar with the rules of the new culture or a different social setting, then you're experiencing culture shock.
Sundar Victor is a graduate student from India who has been in the United States for 1 year. What kind of culture shock has he experienced?
It's not so fast in USA. It's like when you get up, you get so busy with stuff getting around here. In India, people travel by bus or by train, and here it's like you find pretty hard people traveling in buses and trains. India is a poor country, and people don't have money to afford to go on planes and go in for like fancy things and a fancy way of life living there. We have in India like disco clubs, like you go dance and then come back, but we don't have like strip clubs. It's completely banned in India. And even Playboy is banned in India, but it was completely different here.
Sundar has discovered that there can be cultural differences even in the choice of a wedding day. He is surprised that Americans don't try to choose auspicious days, days that hold great promise for the future of the marriage.
Back in India, we are like, for example, when you take a marriage and some wedding section, we choose a particular auspicious day for it, and then we have an auspicious time in a particular day. They look at the stars and sun, where they position, and that is what they think is a very good auspicious time. For example, Saturdays, it's not an auspicious day, so they don't conduct any marriages on Saturdays basically, as far as I know. Friday is a very good day. In the US, they don't take into consideration the time, the day, auspicious day, and all the stuff.
We are all very comfortable in certain environments, and it's being taken out of one's own environment and put into a different environment, or taking oneself out of one's own environment and putting yourself in a different environment. And the cues for interaction are quite different in this new environment, and we all experience a shock. I think the best example, of course, is language.
The language of a particular culture is a large part of its identity and an expression of how the people within that culture perceive and understand their surroundings. Language is more than the spoken word. It embodies all the ways we communicate.
Language embodies the culture, and if you don't have the language, you can't participate in the culture. The values, the meanings, the stories, the traditions, the customs are all passed down through language. So if you lose the language, you lose the culture.
We're not able to express what we think in our minds exactly. When compared to our language, we can put in our language what we think, but here it's pretty difficult for us because we basically learned in the British English, and it's completely different when compared to the American English. They use a lot of slang words and all this stuff. And the professor actually cracked a joke in our class, and all the Americans started laughing, and we Indians, we couldn't get what he was showing us.
When we tend to think that the norms and values of our culture are better than those of other cultures, we fall into a cultural trap known as ethnocentrism.
Ethnocentric thinking means essentially that you're not able to understand the cultural frameworks that others inhabit. It means that you're mostly comfortable with people who are exactly like yourself. So you're unable to cross group boundaries, interact with people who have different class or racial background. People who are ethnocentric tend to have very narrow view of the possibilities of life. The quality of their life is very much impoverished by their inability to understand how other people perceive the world.
In order to truly understand another culture, it's essential to set aside our own predisposed standards. Sociologists call this idea cultural relativity.
Cultural relativity is understanding culture on its own terms, in its own context, with its own history especially, and not taking one's own preconceptions and one's own biases to an understanding of a new culture.
You don't compare it to your culture. In other words, if you're looking at something in another culture, you don't think, well, in my society, this is the way we do things.
Intercultural contacts and experiences not only broaden our minds to new ways of thinking, they can also help us to see our own cultural traits from a whole new perspective.
There are many positive aspects of crossing cultural lines. One, of course, would be getting to learn another people's way of life, the way they think, the way they view the world, the things they find attractive, the foods they eat, the entertainment, even learning their sense of humor.
Both Sundar and his friend Troy Poole have benefited from their cultural interactions. One way Troy has learned about Indian culture is through sharing meals with Sundar.
I don't think I'll ever forget the first time I ate dinner with my hands and no utensils. It was an interesting experience to come and sit on the floor and eat food with my hands and eat their authentic food. I do enjoy Indian food. I enjoy the spices, the various different flavors, flavors that I've never tasted before. I hope that one day, whenever I am in another country, learning another culture and sharing my culture with them, that I can be as open as Sundar and his friends have been with me, to show interest in the people that I'm living with, and to show interest in being open and sharing with others.
Like a fish takes its water for granted, we often ignore our dependence on our cultural environment. Our culture affects every aspect of our lives, from our attitudes and beliefs to the food we choose to eat. By understanding the role culture plays, we can examine our own cultural assumptions and the way we look at the world. American culture is made up of many subcultures. Members of a subculture generally share many of the values and norms of the larger culture. But they also maintain certain aspects, including traditions, values, norms, rituals, language, clothing, tools, and equipment that set them apart. The rough and tumble world of professional rodeo is one such American subculture.
A subculture is part of the major culture, but it has a number of unique aspects unto itself, and rodeo certainly does. It carries with it its own traditions and norms and values and rituals and all of those things which define culture.
The rodeo subculture holds fast to a tradition that dates back to the American West.
Tradition, as viewed by sociologists, is a group of people or a set of values which looks to the past for guidance. Rodeo, of course, grew out of the Old West. Cowboys would get together and have contests, and that is the exact tie from the beginning of rodeo.
Rodeo really is kind of the last dying breed of the Old West. You know, we're free as professional rodeo cowboys. We make our living on the road, dealing with livestock day in and day out, and we travel from town to town. But we don't exactly ride horses everywhere we go either. It's not that we're still in the Old West, but a part of the West is still in us.
The rodeo subculture shares many of the same values as mainstream America. But at the same time, those who live the rodeo life set themselves apart in very specific ways. As a group, members of the rodeo subculture share values that are closely linked to those of the Old West.
There's something which cowboys and cowgirls refer to as the cowboy code, which is a very general set of values that are shared. One is honesty in your word. It's very important to people within the rodeo subculture. If you say you're going to do something, that you do it. It's still a group of people that often operate on a handshake, and that's genuinely true.
The ideal rodeo cowboy, honest, hardworking, a lot of try, a lot of dedication.
The idea of rodeo cowboy would be well-mannered, polite, and also real tough and knowing that he's one of the best.
Shared norms are another distinguishing feature of the rodeo subculture.
Norm is a specific expectation for behavior in a given situation. There are certain norms within rodeo which very clearly distinguish it from the general culture. For instance, there's the expectation if you're hurt, you must be physically tough. If you come off a mount and you're hurt, it's expected that you get up, and it's quite amazing in rodeo performances to see some of the injuries that take place, and the cowboys and cowgirls get up, sometimes when they shouldn't.
I've had 9 concussions that I can remember. Cracked my skull, hyperextended both elbows.
I broke my jaws in 5 places, broke both my hands, broke my leg once.
Broke my arm in 2 one time. Broke both of my hands, broke my collarbone, split my clavicle.
I've had my back hurt and I broke an arm.
Separated and hyperextended both of my hips, broke a tailbone.
Broken my ankle twice, had surgery both times, broken ribs, broken wrists.
Fractured my leg in 2 places.
Collapsed the lung, pulled my groin many times, had my hand ripped open. Other than that, I've been fairly lucky.
It's not if you get hurt, it's when and how bad. You know, it's coming. You know it's coming, but it's a chance you take and you can't help it. You have to keep going. You can't just quit.
Language defines a subculture because there are certain terms, certain aspects of the language and vocabulary that are genuinely unique to that culture.
Rodeo people have definitely put their own unique spin on the English language.
Blowing real high means bulls getting off all fours and jumping real high in the air.
Bareback riding, if a horse is real strong, they'll call him real heavy on your arm.
Setting a horse, and that's whenever you check the horse, give it a little bump on the reins before you maybe go around the barrel.
There are some other terms that are used in rodeo, such as try, which are critical to what a cowboy or cowgirl is all about.
Ideal rodeo cowboy has a lot of grit, a lot of try. God gives us the ability, but the try is up to us. We have to give that 110%, because if you don't, you're not going to make it.
Rituals help define a subculture and are an important part of the rodeo lifestyle, especially when it comes to getting ready for a ride.
I stretch and mentally prepare myself, and then I just tell myself, just pull your rope, take your rep, get out and hang on. I try not to do too much thinking because that can really screw your mind up.
I always stretch and tape my arm so I don't hyperextend it.
Arrange my equipment the exact same way every time. I do go through the same stretching routine. I pray, and then I try to take a little bit of time and picture a perfect ride where you've got a good mental picture when you nod.
Another aspect of many subcultures is the use of special tools and equipment.
In the case of rodeo, many of the tools and much of the equipment comes historically from riding and particularly from cattle ranching. There are other pieces of equipment and tools that are used in rodeo which are unique to rodeo. A piece of equipment that you'll always see at a rodeo performance is with the clowns, sometimes referred to as bullfighters. And one of the clowns has a barrel, always referred to as the man in the barrel.
This barrel is aluminum and it's special made. You'd think these are very cheap, but this barrel will cost over $1,000. And that's with no covering on it at all. And on the inside of it, it's got a little bit of padding in there to help me, and I'll go down in there and kind of curl up in a little ball and hope he don't get in either end of it, which sometimes that does happen.
Clothing is another aspect of a subculture that sets it apart.
You need the boots definitely, because if you're, especially in barrel racing, if you're going fast and you come into a barrel and you have tennis shoes or something on, your foot could slip through the stirrup and you could get hung up.
And our clothes need to be somewhat durable because you never know what might happen. And then, of course, in the saddle bronc riding, we have to wear spurs. And it's kind of the Old West. You're walking around in spurs and a hat like they did 100 years ago.
For now, the spirit of the Old West is alive and kicking in rodeo arenas from Cheyenne to Houston. But in the high-tech world of the future, will rodeo survive?
The future of rodeo could go any number of ways. With rodeo becoming televised and more popular, there's a chance that the traditions, the ties with the Old West, some of the values and norms that distinguish rodeo as a subculture are going to become less clearly defined, and rodeo will become more performance, less Old West, less values, more money. Clearly rodeo needs more money, but it needs to maintain its subculture, which some fear could be lost in the next 20 years or so.
Adios, goodbye, amigos, I am leaving you today.
From the rich tradition of the Old West to the clothes and rituals of its participants, the rodeo embodies many of the aspects of a subculture. Culture refers to all the modes of thought, behavior, and production that are handed down from one generation to another. It consists of three major dimensions: ideas, norms, and material culture. Using these dimensions can help us explore various cultures. A subculture is a group of people who hold many of the values and norms of the larger culture, but also hold certain beliefs, values, and norms that set them apart from that culture. The notion that one's own culture is better than others is called ethnocentrism. To understand another culture or subculture, it is necessary to evaluate it on its own terms, an approach called cultural relativity. If we work to understand another culture and how its members think and feel, we may gain a broader understanding of our own culture.